of disaster, one of which was the damaging of schools. In KwaZulu-Natal, the Education Department says the recently damaged schools during the lockdowns are putting pressure on finances. Over 400 schools were vandalized in the province. The Education Department in the province says it's now embarking on a campaign of rebuilding and fixing vandalized schools. For more on the rebuilding project of schools, we're joined via Skype by KwaZulu-Natal MEC for Education Kwazi Mshengu. Mshengu, Siyabonga for the time to talk to us this morning. Can you quantify the amount of damage to schools?
Well, the amount of damage to school is quite a lot. Actually, in our calculations, it's running over $1 billion in terms of the damage that has been suffered. If we were to take into account the schools that have been damaged over the past years. Those include schools that have been damaged by the storms that we have suffered in the province, but also in schools that have been damaged by our communities. There are also schools that have been there for quite some time, and the infrastructure has really aged and is becoming risky to our learners as well as the educators. So if we're to really rebuild and renovate all the schools that we have identified as needing renovations and refurbishment, we really need quite over $1 billion in terms of the money that we'll request from different institutions such as the Provincial Treasury as well as the National Department of Education.
So in view of all of this, how ready is the province in terms of the 24th August return of the rest of the grades to school?
Well, we are ready. We are ready because what we have done is that where really damage has been too huge, such that we could not open the school without major interventions, we deployed mobile classrooms to those schools so that teaching and learning can continue. But mobile classrooms are just an interim measure. We really need to rebuild and renovate these schools in terms of brick and mortar so that they become proper structures. During this financial year, we have identified 127 schools that will benefit from the program of renovations. We set aside about 318 million to renovate these schools. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, the infrastructure grant had also to be cut by national. We lost about 400 million from KZN back to national to procure things such as COVID-19 related items. So as we are moving forward, we are also taken aback by the cuts that we have suffered. But in this financial year, 127 schools will be renovated, and we are hoping that we'll get more funding for the next financial year so that we continue with this program.
How far is your work with law enforcement officials in terms of bringing perpetrators to book?
We're quite not happy. We're quite not happy indeed about that because there are instances where perpetrators have been caught red-handed stealing in our schools. Some were caught by committee members, handed over to police. But all of those are roaming around the streets. There's not been a single case that has been prosecuted. There's not been a single case of conviction. So we're quite worried, and we have raised this matter with the MEC for community safety in the province. And after the cabinet also received our complaint, we then established a team that is composed by officials from Department of Education, the NPA, as well as SABC, to ensure that they start cracking these cases, particularly those where really the perpetrators were caught red-handed. And our inability to secure convictions means that we're unable to send a clear message to all the criminals that our schools are not playgrounds for criminal elements.
You've given us the financial extent of the problem. Just give us a sense of the kind of infrastructure that's either being vandalized or stolen. What are these people gunning for?
Well, there will be different types of things that get stolen from our schools, particularly the technology investments that we are making in our schools. It also includes the NSNP things, such as the utensils and all these things that are necessary for NSNP programs. But also we have started to see the problem of simply banning our schools. Nothing will be stolen. They will simply ban the school. And that's why at some stage we were convinced that probably we were dealing with a syndicate that is trying to communicate a particular message to government, because they will just ban a school without stealing anything. They will steal the desk, they will steal the doors, they will steal the windows. So they will basically steal everything that they can lay a hand on in terms of in our school. They will even steal the fences of our schools. So some of these schools have really been a target of what we call a syndicate, which we asked the police actually to investigate if we are not dealing with such an act of criminality.
The narrative that the perpetrators are, in some instances, security companies whose contracts had come to an end, and the Department of Education was not renewing these contracts, and so they were damaging or vandalizing schools just to make a point that if they're not there, there won't be sufficient security. Has this been proven to be true, this narrative?
Well, it's a narrative that we requested the law enforcement agencies, particularly the state security agents, also to look at it, because every time there is a burglary in our schools, we continue to get calls from different private companies to say, you must hire us, we're going to protect your schools. And that happens without, it happens every time whenever there is a burglary in our schools. And we have raised that complaint with the law enforcement agencies to say we are also starting to believe that these things are done deliberately so that certain private companies do get a job as they demand at times from the Department of Education, be it the security companies or those who are involved in construction. Because if you ban a school, these people know exactly that will not sit back as a department and not rebuild the school, because it will affect the education of our children, which is a constitutional right that must be protected. So whenever there is a banning of a school, they know that we'll have to cough out some monies again to ensure that we rebuild that school, and we'll have to engage the private construction companies to rebuild the school. So we don't want to rule out any possibility at this stage, but also we are not conclusive on what we are suspecting. That's why we have left everything in the hands of the law enforcement agency.
Yes, thank you for talking to us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time. Let's take a break. You're watching The Agenda.